Department of War carried out a strike on an alleged drug boat overnight.
President Trump celebrated the attack by releasing this video, which shows the moment a boat was blown up in the southern Caribbean.
On October 21st, 2025, a silent act of vengeance struck the Pacific. A single U.S. Navy missile found its mark with killer precision. This was no police raid. It was a targeted military strike against a cartel vessel, a line crossed into open war. So why was a billion-dollar destroyer hunting drug runners with a Tomahawk? What made this boat a threat that demanded annihilation?
We're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country.
This is the raw tale of the U.S. Navy's crushing revenge. Declaration of war on the cartels. For years, it was a slow-motion disaster. A toxic tide of pills and powders flowed across borders, shredding families and hollowing out communities. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid so potent that a few grains can kill, transformed the overdose crisis into something almost industrial in scale. By 2023, roughly 105,000 Americans died from drug overdoses in a single year, with synthetic opioids like fentanyl driving the vast majority of those deaths. That human carnage was the bleak backdrop for a policy shift that would redraw the line between crime and war. The cartels were the obvious source. Over decades, Mexican trafficking organizations evolved from secretive smuggling rings into sprawling criminal enterprises. Vertically integrated producers, transporters, and money launderers operating networks that reached from chemical suppliers in Asia to clandestine labs in Mexico and distribution cells across U.S. cities. They moved product on go-fast boats, hidden fishing vessels, and increasingly on semi-submersible narco-submarines and other low-profile craft built to avoid detection on long Pacific routes. The logistics were industrial, the violence was territorial, and often indistinguishable from insurgent-style tactics. For decades, Washington's response followed the usual drug war playbook: cooperate with foreign law enforcement, chase down shipments, freeze bank accounts when possible, and prosecute traffickers when they could be caught. That approach snuffed some flows but never interrupted the larger machine. Hit one cell and several replacements sprang up. The cartels adapted fast, acquiring heavy weapons, improvised explosives, armored vehicles, and private enforcers. Essentially paramilitary capabilities that let them contest territory and intimidate civic institutions. The result was a blunt, grinding stalemate for which the old tools increasingly felt inadequate. So in 2025, a political rupture occurred. The U.S. government moved to treat the most dangerous transnational drug organizations not merely as criminal syndicates, but as entities that fit the legal definition of terrorist groups. Executive actions and State Department listings formalized this reframing, designating several cartels and transnational criminal organizations as foreign terrorist organizations and placing additional sanctions and counter-terror designations on key leaders and networks. That legal toggle did more than change an acronym. It unlocked an entirely different toolkit, sweeping financial authorities, expanded sanctions, and a justification to treat some operatives as unlawful combatants rather than ordinary criminal defendants. The political effect was immediate. Agencies across defense and intelligence began planning for sustained kinetic operations rather than episodic law enforcement seizures. Operationally, the shift meant sending military capabilities after logistical nodes rather than waiting for court warrants. In late 2024 and into 2025, U.S. forces and special operations units increased interdiction efforts in the Caribbean, where maritime smuggling had long been a major conduit. But the real artery for the fentanyl trade was the Eastern Pacific, long patrols of fishing boats, low-profile vessels, and submersibles that ferried precursor chemicals and finished product toward Central America and Mexico. Targeting those ocean highways required a mix of naval assets, airborne surveillance, signals intelligence, and international maritime cooperation. Small surgical strikes against transport vessels and hardened lab complexes were paired with a far more aggressive campaign to choke the finance and logistics that made mass production possible. The shift was as much about choking off supply chains as about deterrence. Sanctions and financial pressure, enabled by the terror designation, allowed Treasury and Justice to freeze accounts, seize front companies, and issue global travel and transaction bans that struck at the cartel's ability to buy weapons, bribe officials, or move profits. Intelligence fusion centers pooled data from law enforcement, the military, and foreign partners to map routes and prioritize targets. But the move from policing to a military-style campaign raised thorny questions. The risk of escalation, the legality of strikes near or inside other countries' waters, and the danger of unleashing further instability in regions already ravaged by cartel violence. What changed finally was the scale and ambition of the response. No longer just a game of interdiction and prosecutions, the fight became a sustained attempt to sever the trafficking arteries at sea and in remote manufacturing hubs, to interrupt not a shipment, but the very system that turned chemical precursors into lethal pills. The result has already reshaped tactics, alliances, and the ethical calculus of counter-drug policy. Whether it will save lives faster than it creates new risks remains the central contested question. The hunt in the Eastern Pacific. So the decision was made. The Pacific Ocean was now the new front line, but the Eastern Pacific is not a pond. It is a staggering, vast emptiness of blue water, stretching for millions of square miles. Finding one single boat out there isn't a needle in a haystack. It's a needle in 1,000 haystacks, spread across an area bigger than the moon. The cartels bank on this. They trust the sheer, overwhelming size of the ocean to swallow them whole. Their boats are small, fast, and painted to blend into the waves. This is the ultimate game of hide and seek with billions of dollars and human lives on the line. This is where the hunt begins. And it doesn't start with a satellite image, it starts in the shadows. The first and most crucial piece is human intelligence, HUMINT. These are sources on the ground, informants deep within the cartel logistics networks. Maybe a dock worker paid to talk, maybe a disgruntled member looking for a way out. These whispers provide the first breadcrumb, a location, a time, a boat description. Something is moving from this port on this night. It's a fragile, precious clue. That clue then hits the world of electronic ears, signals intelligence, or SIGINT. This is where agencies listen. They aren't listening for ocean waves, they're listening for the digital ones. Cartel members, believing they're clever, use encrypted radios and burner phones. But sometimes they slip. A short coded transmission to coordinate a rendezvous. A cell phone that pings a tower near a remote coastal village. These electronic breadcrumbs are collected, analyzed, and cross-referenced with the human tip. The puzzle starts to have a few more pieces. And America doesn't work alone. Allied nations in the region also share what they know. Their coast guards see things, their police hear things. This whole network, the human whisper, the electronic ping, the partner tip, fuses together into what's called an intelligence nexus. It's a single glowing point on a map that says, "Watch here, something is happening." Now the high-tech eyes take over. This is the ISR dragnet, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. First, the eyes in the sky, literally. Satellites orbiting the Earth can scan unbelievable swaths of ocean. They might not see the boat itself at first, but they can see patterns. They can spot unusual vessel traffic leaving a known cartel port under the cover of darkness. They provide a wide view. But a satellite passes over and then it's gone. You need something that can stay, something that can stare. That's where the MQ-9 Reaper drone comes in. It can fly over a single spot in the ocean for 24 hours straight, maybe more. Piloted by a crew sitting safely in a control station thousands of miles away, it flies so high it's invisible and silent to the people below. Its powerful cameras and radar can scan the water, looking for the specific signature of a small, fast-moving boat that matches the intelligence. Once it finds a candidate, it locks on. It begins the persistent stare. It follows, it watches, it gathers proof. Sometimes a larger bird joins the hunt, the P-8 Poseidon. This is a mighty manned submarine hunter plane, packed with even more radar and sensors. It can race out to the area, drop sonobuoys to listen underwater, and use its advanced systems to confirm what the drone is seeing. Between the satellite, the staring drone, and the powerful Poseidon, the once vast ocean starts to feel very, very small for the men on that boat. Now comes the critical moment: target identification. The military calls it PID, positive identification. This isn't a guess. This is absolute certainty. The analysts and commanders aren't just looking at a boat, they are building a case. Does the boat's speed and course match the intelligence? Does its point of origin line up? Can its communications be linked to a known cartel frequency? Most importantly, can they link it without a doubt to one of those named terrorist-designated cartels? This is the legal and moral threshold. They must be sure. This isn't just any smuggler. This is a vessel belonging to an organization officially at war with the United States. On October 21, 2025, for one specific panga cutting through the Pacific, the answer was yes. All systems confirmed, PID achieved. This boat wasn't random. Intelligence linked it to a Sinaloa cell that had moved over 2,000 kilograms of fentanyl precursors in the previous 3 months. The cargo on board this run, enough chemical to produce 500 million lethal doses. That made it a priority target. Choosing the right tool for the job? Now the weapon itself, and the moment the story turns cinematic and inexorable. Up to then, interdictions in the Caribbean had been surgical: helicopters or drones loitering low, small rockets and hellfires snapping off to stop a speedboat. But for this first major strike in the open Pacific, the message had to be louder. The United States picked a tool that combined lethality, precision, and deniability. The missile chosen was from the AGM-114 Hellfire family, a weapon born as an anti-armor round but now standard across aircraft, helicopters, and remotely piloted systems. Its defining feature in this role was the tandem warhead, a two-stage shaped charge designed to defeat reactive armor on tanks by detonating an initial charge to defeat the active protection, then punching a second deadly jet through the hull. Against a thin fiberglass or composite smuggling vessel, that kind of focused, armor-punching blast is overkill in the best sense. It shears through engines, fuel tanks, and structural members with surgical finality. The missile rode up into the sky on the Reaper's hardpoint, while the drone hovered high above, its electro-optical slash infrared sensors painting the boat in crisp, real-time video. From roughly 20,000 feet, operators could see crew, surf, wake, and the telltale stacked packages on deck. The Reaper's targeting suite and the operators who manned the ground control station could provide continuous laser designation or hand off the laser spot from another source. Hellfires employ semi-active laser homing, meaning the missile homes on reflected laser energy, painting the target until impact. That allowed the crew to refine aim to the last second to avoid fishermen, to choose the point of impact that would destroy propulsion and cargo while minimizing wider damage. Cost was part of the calculus, but not the point. At roughly $150,000 a shot, a Hellfire pales next to the street value of a large drug shipment, and it buys something more valuable than money: immediacy. From spotting the target to terminal guidance, everything is visible. Battle damage assessment is instantaneous. Launching from altitude kept pilots and airframes safe from small arms and the vagaries of sea operations, while the weapon's focused lethality left little behind: no floating cache to be salvaged, no intact evidence to be traced home. This was not area bombardment. It was a deliberate surgical strike calibrated to end one journey and send a message to many more. In the Pacific's vast blue theater, a single, perfectly guided Hellfire from a high-altitude Reaper could sever a trafficking artery in an instant and demonstrate that the campaign would no longer be content with interdiction alone. The execution. The clock ticked down. It was October 21st, 2025, a day that had started like any other for the men on that boat, but high above them, the machine finished its watch. It was now time to act. Far away from the rolling Pacific waves, in a quiet, dark room somewhere in the United States, 2 crew members sat at their controls. This was the ground control station. These were the pilots of the Reaper drone. They weren't wearing flight suits in the cockpit. They were looking at a wall of digital screens. Their world was made of data, camera feeds, and targeting crosshairs. On their main screen was a perfect God's eye view of the ocean. And in the center of that screen, a tiny white speck cutting a faint wake through the deep blue. The drone held a steady, silent orbit miles above. The order had been given. The legal authorities were satisfied. The final step belonged to these crew members. A calm, technical conversation took place. It was all business. No dramatic speeches. They ran through the final checks. Systems were green. The missile was ready. The laser designator was powered up. The drone's computer was fed the exact coordinates, the perfect aiming point. They wanted the missile to hit the engine block. That was the boat's heart. Destroy that, and the vessel would be dead in the water, a sinking piece of wreckage. The pilot's hand moved to the control interface. Their finger was not on a physical trigger. It was over a button on a console. A cursor hovered over a command on a screen that said in simple letters, "Weapons Release." Down below on the boat there was no warning, no roar of an approaching jet, no silhouette of a ship on the horizon, just the sound of their own engine and the wind. They felt alone, they felt hidden. But they were wrong. Back in the control room, the final cue appeared. In the jargon of drone pilots, it was called the rifle cue. The system had a solid lock. All the conditions were perfect. The weapon could hit exactly where it was aimed. The pilot took a breath. And then, they executed the command. On the wing of the Reaper drone, high in the thin, cold air, the Hellfire missile released from its rail mount. For a split second, it simply fell. Then, its rocket motor ignited. A sudden violent burst of flame and smoke erupted in the sky. The missile accelerated faster than the speed of sound. It was no longer just a piece of metal. It was now a guided spear screaming downward toward the ocean. This was the terminal phase. The missile did not fly straight at the side of the boat. That would have been too risky. It might have hit a wave and dove uselessly into the water. Instead, it followed a near-vertical top-attack profile. It came from almost directly above. It was guided by either a laser beam painting the target from the drone or by its own radar seeking out the precise shape of the boat. The guidance system made tiny last-second adjustments. The fins on the missile body twitched. It aligned itself perfectly with that engine block. The entire flight took mere seconds. For the men on the boat, if they even looked up at the right moment, they would have seen only a brief, thin trail of smoke in the sky, a line straight down from the heavens. There was no time to react, no time to jump, no time to even understand what was happening. Then came the impact. The tandem warhead was designed for this exact moment. It wasn't just a simple bomb that exploded all around it. It focused its energy into a single, hyper-powerful jet of molten metal and force. It struck the center mass of the boat, right on target. The effect on a small fiberglass and aluminum hull was catastrophic and instant. There was a bright orange flash. A sharp, thunderous crack echoed across the empty water. The boat did not simply blow apart into a million pieces. It violently disintegrated from the inside out. The engine compartment vanished in a cloud of shrapnel and flame. The hull splintered and tore open. Debris, pieces of fiberglass, fragments of the engine, chunks of metal were hurled in a wide circle across the water's surface. Everything happened in less than a single second. From the ignition of the rocket motor to the flash of impact, the story of that boat and the 2 men inside it was over. The aftermath and the assessment. The thunderclap faded. The echo rolled away and died. What was left was a sudden, shocking silence, broken only by the sound of the waves. Where a speeding boat was just moments before, now there was only chaos on the water. A dark, expanding smear of fuel oil burned on the surface. Small flames flickered among the floating wreckage. The larger pieces of the hull were already tilting, sinking quickly, dragged down by the heavy engine. There were no cries for help. No survivors struggled in the water. The strike was too precise, too powerful, and too sudden. The 2 cartel operatives on board were killed instantly. The force of the shaped charge, the blast, and the devastating spray of hull fragments left no chance. This was not an attack meant to disable. This was an attack meant to destroy. And it did. High above, the Reaper drone entered its next phase. It circled. Its high-definition cameras with powerful zoom lenses were fixed on the scene below. This process was called the Battle Damage Assessment, or BDA. The crew in the control room thousands of miles away was not celebrating. They were working. They were gathering facts. They watched the debris field. They noted the size of the oil slick. They looked for any signs of movement, any sign of life. They saw none. They watched as the largest piece of the wreck, the shattered stern, tipped vertically and then slid beneath the waves with a final gurgle. Within minutes, the only things left on the surface were a rainbow sheen of fuel, a few splintered planks of wood, and a cushion bobbing in the swell. Within 6 minutes, the wreckage had completely sunk. Only an oil slick and scattered debris remained. The drone pilot methodically recorded all of this. The footage was saved. The data was logged. After a final sweeping pass over the area, the crew was satisfied. They had their confirmation. The mission was a success. The pilot keyed the microphone and sent a simple, professional message back to the chain of command. The words were dry and clear. Battle damage assessment complete, target destroyed, no survivors observed. That was the final report. That was the end of the event. 2 men were dead. A boatload of narcotics worth millions was at the bottom of the sea, and a message had been written across the ocean in fire and force, a message that said the rules had changed. The patience had run out. The long arm of American military power had just reached out from the sky with chilling precision and demonstrated exactly what the new war on the cartels looked like. It was remote. It was sudden. It was absolutely final. And for those on the water, there was no warning, and there was no escape. The message sent. The echo of the explosion vanished quickly, swallowed by the endless wind and waves of the Pacific. Where a boat had been, there was now a dark smear of debris on the water. Oil, splintered fiberglass, a silence more deafening than the blast. But the work was far from over. Almost immediately, the next phase began. This was not a fire-and-forget operation. The U.S. military needed to know exactly what it had hit. A signal went out, likely from a U.S. Coast Guard cutter already stationed in the region, or perhaps a Navy vessel operating nearby. Its orders: proceed to the coordinates, secure the scene. This was a forensic battlefield now. The crew of that ship would have a grim task, documenting everything, taking pictures of the wreckage, using nets to recover pieces, not just to confirm the kill but to gather intelligence. Were there serial numbers on the engines? Was there any cargo that survived? Any fragments of phones or electronics that could tell a story? This was a chance to peer directly into the cartel's logistics chain. The ocean was trying to hide the evidence, but America was determined to fish it out. Back in Washington, the public machinery kicked into gear. Within hours, a press release from the Pentagon landed. The language was dry, precise, and chilling. It confirmed that on October 21st, in international waters of the Eastern Pacific, a U.S. Navy asset had conducted a kinetic strike against a vessel belonging to a designated foreign terrorist organization. It stated the strike was successful. It used phrases like degrading operational capabilities and defending national security. There were no cheers, no boasts, just cold, hard facts on paper. The message was clear. This was not an emotional act of revenge. It was a clinical execution of policy. Business for the new war was now open. Behind the scenes, in the cartel's hidden headquarters and remote safe houses, a different kind of calculation was happening. Imagine the shock. For years, their biggest threat at sea was a Coast Guard chase, maybe a few warning shots. The worst-case scenario was arrest and extradition. Now their colleagues had simply ceased to exist, vaporized by a weapon of war they never saw coming. This forced a brutal new math. The risk calculus for moving product just changed forever. No longer was the question, can we outrun them? The new terrifying question became, are we being painted by a satellite right now? Is a missile already in the air? The demonstration of reach and will was absolute. The cartels pride themselves on controlling territory. The U.S. Navy had just proven it controlled the very sky and sea. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.